go.
Lovely. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. Welcome to today's event, which is the Legacy of Thelma and Louise panel discussion. My name is Holly. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the creative producer at London South Bank University. And I have been organising this event with Lucy Brown. This event is part of a wider programme of events called Trailblazing Women on and off screen, which is in its 4th year. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about that. Trailblazing Women on and off screen is an international event series hosted by women in screen and research and enterprise in the School of Arts and Creative Industries at London South Bank University. This is our 4th year, as I mentioned, and it's our first online, which is very interesting and exciting, but I feel like we're all online pros by now. We're thrilled to be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the UK release of the iconic film, Thelma and Louise, in association with the Geena Davis Institute on Gender in Media. So it's a very exciting year, and obviously lots of inspiration has come from that film. As always, we'll be blending practice and theory to bring the film industry and academy together through keynotes, panel discussions, screenings, and practical masterclasses. So if you'd like to know more about the full programme, feel free to send me a message during this talk, and we can send you the link to the other events that we have going on. There's lots more exciting things that we have planned, and more spaces on those as well. I'm just going to pop in the box our Twitters. So I'd love for you guys to tweet us during the event or afterwards about how you found it. If you've enjoyed it, that would be lovely to hear about it. If you didn't enjoy it, don't feel like you need to say anything. And you've popped them in there already. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And we're trying to use the hashtag Thelma Louise 30. So it'd be lovely to keep using that so we can keep the conversation going. We're very excited today to have some fantastic speakers with us, and I'm going to introduce them shortly. But firstly, what I'm going to do is just read through Lsbu's respect and dignity statement just to set the tone for the event. So I don't know this off by heart, so please just excuse me whilst I look at the other screen. Everyone speaking at or attending an Lsbu event, whether in person or virtually, should be treated with respect, dignity, and courtesy. Lsbu operates an environment built on equality, inclusion, and acceptance. We value contributions, feedback, and comments, and wish to create a space for sharing, learning, celebrating, and bringing communities together. Lsbu does not tolerate any form of bullying, abuse, harassment, or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour, including behaviour that potentially impacts or contradicts Lsbu's reputation and values, will be treated seriously and acted upon. Anyone exhibiting any examples of this behaviour will also be removed from the webinar. We want our events to be an enjoyable, safe, and warm experience for all, so thank you for adhering to these guidelines. I'm now just going to hand over to Neil, who's going to take you through some of the technical housekeeping. He kind of mentioned there, but we'll just go into a bit more detail.
Hi there, my name is Neil Hudson-Basing. I'm the Corporate Events Manager for London South Bank University. My pronouns are he and him. Just to take you through the Zoom functionality. So it's great to see people using the chat box already. Please continue to do so throughout the event. It's great to see your thoughts and comments. Keep your introductions coming in there. In a world where we're all virtual at the moment, it's great to help us build up some networking and break down that virtual wall that we're all experiencing at the moment. The next button along is the Q&A function. Please do distinguish between the Q&A function and the chat box and pop your questions directly into the Q&A box, letting us know who your question is for. If it's for everyone, simply put a question for all. That enables us to work our way through those. You can also upvote on the questions you most want to see answered by clicking the little thumbs up symbol, and that boosts them to the top. So that's very much in your control. Next, you'll see that I've enabled closed captioning, which are the subtitles that are appearing on your screen right now. You can choose to hide those by clicking the little up arrow next to CC Live Transcript at the bottom of the screen, and that will hide them. But we do enable them in the interests of inclusivity and accessibility. As Holly said, please share your thoughts and comments on Twitter. If you have any questions, I'll be in the background throughout the event. Holly, back over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Neil. Okay, lovely. I'm just going to introduce all of our lovely panelists, and then we'll get started with the discussion. So first of all, we have Professor Marita Sturken, who's in the Department of Media, Culture and Communications at New York University and author of BFI classics Thelma Louise. We've also got Dr. Shelley Cobb, Associate Professor at Southampton University, author of Adaptation, Authorship and Contemporary Women Filmmakers. Shelley's also been teaching Thelma and Louise for 10 years, so definitely an expert. I would also like to introduce script consultant, lecturer and scriptwriter Funke Oyabanjo. Funke has had various shorts produced, including her television script The Window, which was produced for Channel 4's Coming Up season. And last but certainly not least is Lucy Brown. Lucy is an award-winning educator and practitioner. She is head of division for film and associate professor at London South Bank University. So I'm very excited to be here because you're all lovely, accomplished women, which is just so inspiring. So I'd love to get the conversation started with quite an easy question. What was your first memories of watching Thelma and Louise? If anyone would like to start straight away, or I can pick somebody.
I can say, so I have a very, very strong memory. I was actually living in Santa Cruz, California, going to graduate school, and I went to see it with my friends because we'd heard it was kind of interesting. And my normally rather mild-mannered friend at one point, I think it was the truck driver scene, stood up and just went, yeah. And I was like, oh my God, and it was, as were most of the audience. So I think I was really, really struck by the audience response to it in that first moment.
I love that. Definitely inspired some strong feelings in me, for sure. Funke, what about you?
My first, when I went to see it 2 or 3 times, but at the time there was still a centre called the Women's Centre in London, and that was in Wild Court in Holborn. So I went with a group of women, and I was part of the Women's Audiovisual Education Scheme. So we went to see it in a wonderful cinema in London, small independent cinema. And it was lovely because I had the company of friends, so we could yell and scream at particular moments. And even at the moments where the inappropriate moments, we were yelling and shouting and screaming. So it was wonderful. And I remember it very well because even though as a Black woman, I thought, this is slightly problematic, these are white women that are allowed to run rampage. What would be the result for Black women in that scenario? But I still felt an allegiance. It was that seeing women do this. And that is what I found really interesting and quite, shall I say, emotionally fulfilling in the screening. So yes.
Love that. Shelley, what about you?
I felt the way that those two felt, but I wasn't in a group that made it possible. It was my first year at university. And I think there was a sense of there's some of us that kind of had a feeling for it, but we were with a kind of mixed group. I think some of the young men didn't have such a feeling for it, and were a bit uncomfortable and awkward and wanted to kind of take shots at the representation of men. And I'm like, but women are stereotyped all the time. Welcome to the club, right? Like, here, have your time and your experience. And I think, and some conversations afterwards were interesting in terms of just the stars themselves and how much we liked them, admired them, but kind of funny conversations about their clothing swaps. I don't know why this stuck with me, but one friend was like, how come they look so good in straight leg jeans? Because, women's bodies don't fit straight leg jeans. And I was like, no, that's a fair point or whatever. But I'm like, I don't really care about that at the time. I care about them shooting up the truck or whatever. So I think we were at that kind of age, a bit more, I knew what I felt, but the kind of more timid conversation as we were kind of trying to figure out what we think about this film, which we knew was, which it was widely kind of, it could raise controversy, right? And it could sort of raise conversations where it made your male friends very uncomfortable, and we weren't always comfortable challenging them on that. So just to be honest about my actual experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's like almost you've got kind of a backup group now. It's like, well, the film said it, so pipe down, men. Lucy, what about you?
Yeah, so it's still one of my all-time favourite films, and I was a teenager and I was in Telford when I saw it. And I saw it with my best friend Tanya Reese, who is here on the line. Yeah, so we went to see it in Telford, and then I've actually ended up making this short sort of audiovisual essay documentary that you'll get to see a bit later, and that is about that experience because it stayed with me. So the film itself, I was just blown away by it because I felt like I hadn't seen anything like that, and it really touched me. And it was at a point where friendships mean so much at that age when you're a teenager, and I felt like I was seeing a friendship that I hadn't seen before, because normally, when you're watching television, often the girls aren't supposed to be getting on, women are always fighting. It's about this girl fight, cat fight, and so it was really refreshing. And then obviously the other sort of things also resonated, because it's just that sort of shock, isn't it, of thinking, wow, this is the world that we live in. We've got this friendship, but we've got this sort of oppressive world that we've got to kind of juggle and get through. And yeah, so well, obviously you'll see more about my reactions to that, but hence the love for the film and organising the event.
Yeah, excellent. Oh, that's really great to hear all of the kind of your first memories. And I think it was for everybody, it seems so visceral, and like you can always remember something that happened from it quite clearly. Great. Well, we'd just like to go into some individual kind of, you talking about kind of why you think it has the legacy it has, and kind of why it's so important still to this day. And yeah, I think we'd just go into some individual kind of presentations and thoughts, and I think feel free to cut into each other and comment on each other's as well. That'd be nice. Marita, should we start with you again? We'll go in the same order. That makes most sense, I think.
Sure. So I thought I would just say a little bit about why I think the film was so radical in its moment. And I think some of its radical quality is about the way in which it was constructed. And so I think there are subtle aspects to the film that actually kind of achieved this radical quality. And I feel like it's really important for us to recognize that the way people talk about this film, many people talk about it as a life-altering film, is very, very rare for films, right? So I think I would love for us to talk more about how this film achieved that over the years. Susan Sarandon says that over the years she's gotten lots of letters, and there are two films that she was in, Rocky Horror Picture Show and Thelma Louise, that people wrote to her and said, this film changed my life, So I think that's such a rare quality. It's worth discussing more. And then I would also say there were really two debates that happened when the film was first released as really the most talked about film of 1991. And one was the debate about the depiction of women and guns and the laws and the kind of threat of the film to that question. But the other was also a debate among women about, why is this so inspiring? Why is this so empowering to us? Trying to understand actually that kind of visceral response that I think was new for many of us as audience members. And so thinking then about how people were trying to kind of sort that through. And I would say that I think that the film is uniquely well crafted, and that has to do with the collaboration of the script by Callie Khouri and Ridley Scott's direction, right? So when you look at the film again now, part of what holds up is about craft and structure, because it was so well scripted. Right? So I'm just going to go through a couple of points here that I think kind of contribute to its radical nature. First of all, it's a real mixed genre reversal film, right? It's got screwball comedy, it has drama, it's got road movie, buddy film, action film. And I think we're much more used to that kind of genre mixing in the 2000s, but in that era, that was a very interesting challenge. And then, of course, as everybody knows, right, placing women into traditional male roles, say, for instance, of the classic road movie, really challenged viewers, right? So, you know, in the classic road movie, men leave women behind, and that's the whole point, right? And so here, women leave men behind, and women are the source of the depiction of liberation in the film. And so I think there too, the radical nature of the gender reversal in film genre was also very much about saying, women are going to be the source of empowerment and liberation in this film. And you can't really enjoy the film unless you identify with the protagonists who are women. So part of the challenge there, which people felt viscerally, especially viewers who were uncomfortable, but didn't necessarily know enough about the history of Hollywood film, for instance, to understand why that was such a challenge, right? Because of course, identification throughout classic Hollywood film has been with male protagonists, right? That one shift really challenged viewers in ways that I think was really radical. And that, of course, also, I'm not going to talk about this now, but it has a lot to do with how gazes are constructed in the film, and women are allowed to gaze upon men, and men like Brad Pitt are gazed upon with pleasure, and gazes are challenged. And so in its own way, the script actually, along with the direction, really flipped many of those conventions. I think there's also a way in which the film portrays how the world is structured by gender in ways that had really not been depicted before. And here, to me, this is very much about an interaction of the script and the cinematic direction. The women are liberated, they're driving through the Western landscape, they're constantly cut off by symbols of masculinity, by cowboys and trucks and motorcyclists, and then they are constantly cinematically under the surveillance of the law, right? And at the same time, the men are stuck at home. They're waiting with Daryl. They're waiting for the phone to ring, you know, sort of conventional female stereotypical behavior. And this, of course, is not actually very realistic about how people are tracked down through the law, but works cinematically quite well, right? The women are in the sunlight. It's raining where the men are, right? They're interior, they're depressed. They're reading porn, you know, and watching old movies. And so the sort of sense of the men restricted and the women liberated is also really emphatically portrayed cinematically in the film. I think everybody feels that the film is a very, very powerful depiction of female friendship in a way that was quite radical and actually remains quite radical. It's also a very powerful depiction of how men and women misunderstand each other. So the depiction of female friendship balances quite well with the portrayal of the complexity of heteronormative relationships and how men and women actually deploy different vocabularies, talk past each other. Right? But I think its most radical sort of element really has to do with women and the law. And here is where I feel we can see very directly how the film sadly still has such relevance today. Right. So when people talk about the film changing their lives, a lot of that has to do with experiences of sexual violence and the whole question that the film raises about the killing of Harlan as a morally justified act that cannot be legally justified within the way the law is structured. As Thelma says, the law is some tricky shit. And so in that sense, I feel that the film really gets at this complexity of female subjectivity, and especially female subjectivity in relationship to legal norms that are so normalized in terms of creating impunity for sexual violence. So when we think about the kind of renewed debate that's taking place today with Me Too and Time's Up, on one hand, we can say that the conversation about it and understanding about it has changed since the time of Thelma Louise. At the same time, part of what that shift has done is reveal how little has changed, right? The sort of relentless examples of sexual harassment, loutish behavior, unpunished male behavior, misogyny that have come forward and been exposed by Me Too is also this really terrible reminder of how little has changed in relationship to sexual violence. And so in that sense, I feel that the relevance of this depiction here of how the law cannot account for female subjectivity, I think sadly remains with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Muta. That's some really interesting thoughts and points there. Funke, do you want to lead on from that?
Gosh, I think Marita, I hate to say this, you've stolen all my ideas.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't worry. So that's the beauty of going first. Now I'm radically rethinking what I'm going to talk about now as I speak. I'm going to approach this from a interesting viewpoint, and I say that from my positionality as a Nigerian woman living in the UK. Now, the idea of women guns is not a new thing for me because, of course, we come from a tradition where we've had French Black women from Francophone African countries, and you see them with guns, and you see, a Nigerian female cop framed in a Nollywood movie, or the movies that we had before Nollywood, as policewomen, and they have men carrying their bags as they enter to the office. So it's an interesting framing of, how women are depicted. I think with Thelma Louise, what struck me most of all, and I think it was the power of possibility in terms of storytelling. And that's what struck me. I was part of an organization where we were teaching women how to make films, but sometimes I think we were reinforcing the male gaze, male ideas, even though we were trying to break them. And the only times we could see those gazes, that the male gaze broke it, was outside on the margins, filmmaking on the margins. So it was wonderful to see Thelma Louise actually challenge the whole idea of the male gaze and actually put women in the frame and put them in the frame from a particular perspective. Secondly, when I think of the storytelling of Thelma Louise, I think I think of the subtext. That's what really strikes me more than anything. And going back to what Marita said, she talks about the crafting. And yes, that craft is in the screenplay and that collaboration with Ridley Scott. So when we think of everything, you open that script and you see the depression and the disorganized lives these women lead. So you think of Thelma, she's described as a woman Louise, a woman who's too old to be working as a waitress. That tells you something about the society. And Callie Khouri is sort of really cutting through. We know that feeling of what it is to be marginalized. And, as a woman, because you don't have those opportunities, you're reduced, you're too old, you're always 10 or 20 years behind the men. So that line always spoke to me. Or with Thelma, there's a wonderful line in the script where everything in the house feels like a half-hearted DIY project. And you think, yes, I completely understand that. And why is that? Because again, I come from Nigeria and I've seen those half-hearted DIY projects, women that are supposedly happily married, but the subtext of that relationship manifests itself in a different way when you look at the house, you look at the children, you look at what's actually going on. And then we think of the men, the way the men are written. And there's, again, for Daryl, the line I love, polyester was made for this man. and you think, okay, I have an idea of what this man is like and how he would act. And, what does it mean? What does polyester mean? I remember saying when I was working in fashion very long time ago, may you rot in polyester hell to some person. And then to read it in a script years later that polyester was made for this man, I think, wow, Callie Khouri has done something really wonderful in terms of the storytelling. I can get into this man's psyche. I understand his viewpoint. I understand his insecurities and why he behaves in the way he behaves. So coming back to what Thelma Louise does in terms of storytelling, it's a subtext. And like Marita said, it's that radicalization of women, how women have to cope on an everyday basis, their lives. And then when they try to break out, how they are punished. You are punished every time you have a radical thought. It starts from the thought. You're punished for the thought. You're punished for the action. You're punished for the result of that action. And I think why Thelma Louise appealed to me so much is the fact that I didn't care. It was sort of, I was rooting for them. And the way Callie has written it, I identify with these women. And unlike other, shall I say, genres, like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or they're known as well-known outlaws, so we root for them anyway. These women we do not know, and it's through the interaction, there's little interactions, there's little humiliations that they go through daily, and I shouldn't call them little, those, I should say, tired, repetitive interactions that we go through daily as women. That's how you identify with them, and it's what they do to unpick and unpack those interactions. That's what I find fascinating, and that's what I sort of identified with. There were times that I would have talks with my Black female friends and say, oh, it's white woman's story, this and that and the other. But the thing about it is, because of the way intersectionality works and the fact that one is doubly impacted, it still is, as women, if Black men had power, would we still have to negotiate those spaces in those ways? And I hate to say that possibly we'll have to. So that's why I looked at it from a female point of view. Then you look at class, because usually in the buddy movie, these are, usually it's well-known men, well-known outlaws, they have a reputation and we respect them. That's not the case with these women. These are women that are making a difference with what they have. And so for me, if storytelling is indeed entering the life, the shoes of somebody else, and empathizing and understanding the world in a different way, well, Thelma Louise did that for me. It really did.
Thank you, Funke. I don't think you didn't need any of your original points. That was brilliant on its own. Thank you. Shelley, what about with you? Would you like to carry on from that?
Yeah, sure. I said I would talk about the fact that I've been teaching the film for a decade at least, and even a bit longer than that to my previous job. But and I obviously use Marita's book amongst other things. Oh, and just a reminder, a shout out to my best friend who's joined us now, Hannah, who's in the chat. Our favorite line is, "We'll be drinking margaritas by the sea," Mama says. Which we say all the time. But when I teach the film, I kind of covered I obviously cover key things that I've already been talking about. First one is the gaze, and the moment where she's gazing at Brad Pitt, and he's being the one to be looked at, is when the students really want to, kind of get into and talk about that reversal there. But they also really pick up on some really smaller, interesting moments, because that one then eventually evolves into the conversation of like, oh, well, she wakes up and changes after she has an orgasm, and like, how sexist is that? What do we do with that? So we end up going down that kind of road. Is it kind of starts off as a reversal of a gaze, and then it's like, oh, what do I do about the fact that she's suddenly kind of become more confident because she's had an orgasm for the first time? Like, what kind of representation is that? Which we work through, and because obviously I think it's not so simple, but we have to kind of work through that, because I want the students themselves to figure out, like, what do you think about this? But they pick up on other smaller moments of the gaze, or bigger ones, like them looking at the truck driver or whatever. But there's this one moment after their clothing has changed quite a lot, because that's something we think about too in terms of their look. They're very feminine. Thelma is particularly feminine, but they have their hair covered, the bright lipstick, all that thing, and they start to switch. And there's this one point about halfway through when they're kind of trying to get around Texas. And trying to explain the size of Texas to British students is always one of my favorite things to do. And like how crazy it is they're trying to go around Texas. Where Louise is in the convertible and she picks up her lipstick and she kind of leans over to the side mirror because she's going to put her lipstick on. She pauses and she chucks it behind her. And they're like, that for them, that's a really important moment where she's kind of gazing at herself and looking and rethinking herself in this trajectory as they become more and more, you know, with the cowboy hats and the jeans, and moving towards that more kind of action cinema mode, and the outlaw mode, the kind of Bonnie and Clyde type position that they find themselves in. And that always comes up every single year. They get that every single year, and they get really kind of intent about that kind of rejection of feminine, performance of femininity through that kind of symbol of the lipstick. Of course, I think about in terms of genre and that kind of putting women at the center of what's normally seen as a male genre, the road movie, and that works really well, and it works well alongside a few other films that do that. I put it in relation with Bound, which always kind of is a film noir with two lesbian women at the center. But they do like to talk about genre and that switching of putting the women at the center, as Marita made very clear, and Funke was talking about as well. But it does raise that question of the representation of the men in the film, and how they sort of, where they were certainly at the time, and still there's always a lot of debate in class, like how much there's just stereotypes of men, whether it's like the you know, the truck driver who's kind of, you know, wolf whistling is over the top. I'm not going to say unreal, because I don't. I think it is actually fairly within the realm of reality, on the roads of California where I grew up. But it's kind of played up a bit. There, you know, Thelma's husband, who's so ridiculous, right? The man-made for polyester. But even the nice guy cop, you know. They're a bit like, even in the end, they're like, he's just sort of, he's not very good at what he does. He can't help them and fix them. They're all kind of bumbling, if you sort of will, and there's sort of some uncomfortability about that. But then we had this really good discussion about how, for so long, women have been stereotyped in films where men are at the center, and they just have to play these stereotyped roles, where they don't get to have much depth, or they're just this sort of, they're just the girl on the side, or they're the nagging mother figure, or they're the wife at the home front. And like, you can just sort of see the kind of shifts happening in the usually decent amount of young men in my class are like, oh yeah, okay, it's not comfortable, is it? But trying to have this conversation about what means, and how watching that film can kind of open our eyes to that kind of shift. And of course, the female friendship is really important. And I teach it alongside films like everything from like 9 to 5 to Bound to A League of Their Own, where I'm thinking about female friendship regularly throughout the module as sort of the theme of the module. And it works for thinking about questions of like, what does it mean to have solidarity and sisterhood? And a lot of these are really, as Funke's pointed out, really white women films. And it's, you know, that's a real, yeah, there's a kind of difficulty of thinking about some of these films, particularly those films at the time that are kind of its contemporaries, white women films. So that kind of representation of female solidarity and friendship, the love they have for each other, that they literally put boys on the side, right, which is another film, where a road film where men become the kind of barriers that they have to traverse and being aside. And I've stolen that from my former professor, Yvonne Tasker, who talks well about films that put put men on the side and women at the center, and being able to think about films with women at the center, and particularly groups of women at the center, not just individual women. You kind of not just the one against the world, or the one against the aliens, or the one superhero amongst all the men, but groups of women, at least 2 or more, and trying to think about what it means to have sisterhood and solidarity. And then the thing we always end up getting a bit stuck on is the ending. And what to do with the ending, because it does raise that question about, I link it back for me for that point about the law that Marita said, in terms of, you know, the justification of the killing and then where they end up. That has shifted over time with my students, like how much they buy the moral argument, or how much they get stuck on the legal argument, and how much they feel like the ending is the only ending that was possible for that narrative, for their narrative, because when we talk through that, they kind of, you know, once she's made the decision, once she's done the shooting, there's nowhere else for them to go but on the run. And it's the thing that triggers the road movie, and being on the run, the outlaw movie. And they have to go around Texas because something has happened to her. And the fact that it's never explicitly named, I think is interesting, because I think as women, we know what has, can't say specifically, but we know what's happened to her, where everyone else said, well, what has really happened to her? It doesn't matter. We know that she has a reason to go around Texas, and then it's related to what's happened to her best friend. But when we talk about the women, we realize like they can't go back. The nice guy cop says, I can help you. And my students can see like, well, no matter what you think about the shooting, whether she had to or not, like there's no going back. The law isn't going to help them. That's exactly what she says, right? The law is tricky shit, as Marita said. We know that that's still the case. It's become particularly prominent discussion in the last couple of years about how the law does not help women. There is nowhere for them to go. They had nowhere else place to be. They can't turn around, or they're just, there's no benefit to turning around as there is going over the edge. That's their kind of last choice, independent choice they have to make. Otherwise, they'll be taken up by the cops, and that kind of mass set of cops chasing after these two women, like the excessiveness of that, I think is, it's very cinematic to Marita's term, but also works again really well to show that they are trapped, but also that they are just legally trapped. They know they have no case, that they can't win. They have nowhere else to go. So they stick together and they go over the edge and make that choice, and the way that it ends in midair. So I think the one last thing to add that has come up a little, I've been able to get them to think about a little bit more recently, is the question of class, right? She is a waitress, and Thelma is a housewife, like kind of her husband's, he's Pim, he's made from polyester. And they're working class women, right? So they are white women, but they're working class women, right? They're even more outside the law. They do not have middle class power. They do not have middle class men who are going to protect them. They are doubly outside the American legal system, the American idea, that kind of culture that already marginalizes them for multiple reasons. And I think it's always been a good film to teach, but it has been so much more productive even in the last couple of years, and kind of post Me Too era, when these things feel much more visceral and real. Anyway, I'll end it there.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah, really interesting points. And I think your point about kind of the representation of men was definitely really interesting. And if we're honestly looking for equality, we have to consider that side of it as well, which I think as women we always do, and that is not necessarily reciprocated. I think from other stereotypes. And then Funke, you made that really interesting point just before we started about it, it is two white women, and had the story been about two black women, would the reaction been even more different? You can kind of imagine. Lucy, I know you wanted to carry on and kind of explain it with your film, but do you want to comment on anything that's been said or go into anything?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a hard act to follow, because I think it's all been so fascinating, all the different things that have been said. And I guess there are so many angles that you can take with Thelma and Louise, when people have talked about race, about class, about sexual violence and harassment. And I guess that is one of the reasons for me why it is such an important film and continues to be such an important film, because of that legacy and the fact that it, I think as a young, I watched it with my nieces as well, and that they can still see aspects of this going on. Obviously there aren't the mobile phones, and in some ways it seems quite dated but the actual themes and the way women are treated, and unfortunately the fact of it can seem quite stereotypical about the men and the harassment, but I think a lot of us as women have sadly experienced quite disturbing, shocking incidents where we're a bit like, oh my God, is this actually happening now? And sadly, that still goes on. So I think certainly that's part of its power. And then if we think about behind the scenes, as Funke touched on, although this was directed by a man, by Ridley Scott, there's a lot of writing about this in terms of how he really did work really closely with Callie Khouri, the screenwriter, and the background of her thinking about this and her wanting to make this film, and it really, and I think in that way for me it really feels like a very female-led film. So even though it has this male director, I think that's partly why it resonated so much as well with me, with lots of other women, that it felt like a real game changer. And I mean, I'll show everyone this short film as well, which is sort of 8 minutes long, and just to sort of contextualize how I came to make this, is that we had a filmmaker in residency at Lsbu, and so we had Professor Kevin B. Lee, who's quite a prolific video essayist, and he's made some really fantastic things, definitely worth looking him up. And so we, as a team, we were sort of asked to think about a childhood or, young teenhood memory of a film that changed our lives and also has a cultural impact beyond that. And then so for me, straight away, it was Thelma and Louise, and I felt spurred on to make the film. So we're going to be playing that, and actually thank you, Neil, so you have also put in the link to Vimeo, so if anyone wants to watch it on there. Yeah, so let's watch, and then interesting to hear everyone's thoughts. Thank you.
And baby, you're so smart.
It's really strange being back, and now I'm back with my dad and my boys and telling them that I'm making this smartphone movie, and it's really a chance to explore what Thelma and Louise means to me and how it was really the beginnings of me discovering feminism and also wanting to fight for equality.
Take your time, you're calling. Baby, call the world. Woo!
This is the college where I met my friend Tanya. We were studying for our A-levels together here back in the early 1990s, and we clicked and we gelled and we really discovered life together, and we had adventures and an incredible friendship. And I guess that's why Thelma and Louise really resonated with us and had such an impact on our lives, because it was that time where we were discovering what it meant to be a young woman and also about the limitations of that role. Hello.
Hello?
Hi, I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear and see you now.
I think for me, it was the first time I'd seen that type of female friendship where they weren't being, that they were the ones that were the central characters, and it wasn't about their rivalry, it was about their genuine friendship, and they were the ones having fun.
I don't think he's gonna apologize.
Nah, I don't think so.
So, normally when you see women on the screen, they're the girlfriends or the daughters or the other characters who are quite sort of small and in the periphery, whereas this, I think that was also part of the excitement, wasn't it, that it was seeing these women and their journey and sort of creating a sense of hope, even though it was out of these really awful, terrible things that happened to women and still happen to women.
After the film, we decided to walk home, and I remember we passed something. There was a man in the bushes, and I didn't see what he was doing, but I'm sure he was was either masturbating or something.
And so it was when we were walking down here with a skip in our step that man came out of some bushes and flashed at us.
It was a real sort of like, oh my God, we need to get away from this. So we ran, I remember we ran into the pub and all these men were like leering and laughing at us. And I think we were really scared. And it was just like, oh my God, it's not so far away from it. Okay, it was a film, but it is real as well. It's in our lives.
When we walked back from Thelma and Louise, we obviously felt on a high, like we could just seize, do what we wanted to do. And then it was that horrible shock of, actually, no, we can't. And then when you try and seek help or refuge, you've got creepy men.
I remember the feeling coming out of that cinema. I was so elated. And I don't know, I thought Thelma and Louise were absolutely fantastic. And, I was kind of really in love with them. And also, our friendship as well. I was really in love with you. And we were just like invincible. But we weren't really, well, the shocking, horrible, the man, the lucky man, it was really shocking to be so high and then to be so scared and shaking.
So I can't remember when I started feeling scared about walking around, and I wonder if it is after watching Thelma and Louise. I'm not quite sure.
My mum never spoke to me about it. Did your mum ever speak to you about that sort of thing?
I can't remember when she told me, but she was almost raped when she was a child, or quite a young teenager or a child or something like that. So when she was walking home over some hills or something, a guy grabbed her and pinned her down.
Hey, quit, stop.
And luckily a passerby saved her. But yeah, and I can't remember when she would have told me that, because I don't think, at the same time, I don't think she would have wanted to scare me. And I know other women talk about this, but if I'm going out and I'm going to be out late at night, I always have to plan and think about how I'm going to get home, how close the location is to the bus stop, the tube stop, and putting my keys in my hand, making sure I don't smile or laugh or look too happy. I don't want to attract attention that's unwanted. Yeah, you're right. The ending, I guess, well, they do die, but it's like you don't want to believe that they died. You want to believe that they just carried on going. Because obviously, luckily, you don't see a horrible car wreck or anything, but there's the sense that, or maybe they just somehow magically ended up in Mexico, drinking cocktails on the beach, which is what they'd wanted to do.
Let's keep going. What do you mean? Go! You sure? Yeah. Get it.
That was absolutely lovely. Thank you, Lucy. What a fantastic film. That was really, really interesting and yeah, so many relatable things there about the kind of walking home. And I think obviously a lot of that has been, in the UK at least, has definitely been raised recently with Sarah Everard and all of that stuff. And for women, it's so like subconscious for us all now, isn't it? We're so trained to, you know, just the simple things you said about not laughing or smiling. It's like, that's what we do. We're human. That's our natural thing. But we're training ourselves not to do that, of just fear, which is horrible. Did you want to say any more words on it, Lucy, or anything else about it?
Yeah.
You don't have to.
With showing it to people, because that's the first time of sort of showing it to an audience. So thank you everyone for your kind words. Yeah, so I think it is just, I mean, you're right, what you were saying there, Holly, you know, why should we have to be like that? Why should we have to be oppressed? I mean, when I met my partner, I think he's always told me I've opened up his eyes to so many things, because I don't think he had any realization of what we often as women have to think about, you know, just to go out and do just ordinary things that we should have the right to do. And I suppose that, you know, that does make us often feel really fed up, and why, you know, and why people talked about the fact that women cheered when this film was on, because, you know, they weren't going to give up, they weren't going to you know, they were going to stand their ground. So although I think some people have said about the ending, for me it's always feels really positive, because I do just think, okay, they made it, and that's it for me. It's a positive ending.
That's how I feel. You know, because I'm a Christian, I always think of them, their spirit lives on, regardless. Their flesh may be scattered, but their spirit is there, and that spirit will continue to cheer women on and continue to encourage women to sort of say no in the face of oppression, there's daily oppression. So yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. We just need a few of us to get going, and then we're a massive club, aren't we? So we're all in it together, and it's that each other person that says no encourages another person to say no, and that's how it kind of works and flows, isn't it? Great film, really enjoyed that. And you won an award for it. I think you're being very humble about that, didn't you? You won an award, Lucy.
Yes, yeah.
A recognition.
So it got an honourable mention at Venice Intercultural Festival, Intercultural Film Festival. So now I was really, really pleased about that. But also, one of the things that I was thinking about is the fact that the car takes on real significance. And this is what some of the I showed it to the my fellow workshop people with the Kevin Bealey workshop, and that fact of the car, that was a safe space. So I have all these happy, amazing memories of myself and Tanya and my sister all driving around and singing and having fun, and you know, you saw that at the beginning of the film, which was really captured with Thelma Louise singing, and you know, whereas when you're, you know, outside of the car, all those experiences of women walking somewhere, you know, that's your vulnerable place. And I mean, one of the comments Kevin mentioned is it quite interesting that you've returned to Telford with your dad and your boys, so the male members of your family, which is just the way it happened to be, because I was visiting during lockdown. But I suppose they're then at the periphery, because it's like they've been forgotten then, because I'm just remembering you know, the friendship that I had with Tanya, and I'm lucky still to have with her.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, the way in which there are certain kinds of interactions that take place in cars, and so you the parallel that you create there. But I also think the car is really a character in this movie, and the fact that Louise has this very very unusual flamboyant car is also a sort of indicator that she's not happy with her life. And she wants something else, because the car then actually becomes a problem for them. It's really part of the reason that they get caught, right? So in a certain sense, she's being punished for that almost flamboyant vehicle that puts them under the gaze, right? But I also think part of what you show is that, you know, there's all sorts of conversations that happen when people are sitting together in cars that might not happen otherwise.
I think the car sort of apart from Louise's attitude to the car, and I always think of it as a safe space, because like Marita's pointed out, you can imagine her saving to buy this car. And even the way when Thelma throws her luggage in the back of the car, so she's very protective of this car, because this is the only space, even her own home, there's a sort of alienation or distancing between herself and her home, the way it's so meticulous and so it's sparkles. But this car is a space she smokes in, it's a space that she feels control, she can put her foot on the pedal and she can go, and it's hers. No one can throw her out, no one can own it, it is hers. But also, like you said, she's punished for that choice, punished for that consumer choice, punished for having the money to buy it, because, you know, usually Thunderbird 77, some sort of, you know, male car. She has it, and she has it in a particular color. And I always think of cars not only as intimate spaces, but spaces where people they're confessional spaces, aren't they?
Right.
Cars aren't confessional, they're confessional spaces. So yeah, so it's interesting that you've made the parallel in your own car, Lucy, and the car in Thelma and Louise. Yeah.
Cars are very symbolic of freedom anyway. I think I remember when I first passed my test, my mum was like, well, I guess I'll never see you now then. It was just like, yeah, it's freedom, I'm out of here, I've got places to be, friends to see. So it was just, yeah, definitely very representational of that as well, for sure. All right, well, I think we've got some questions in the Q&A box, and do keep sending them in, everybody, and I think I'll just run through them, and I think they pretty much look like they're for most people. They don't seem to see any that are like particularly one person, so let's have a look here. So Nigel is asking, what do we kind of mentioned this a bit earlier, but I'm happy for people to touch on it again. What do we think about the portrayal of men in film? Mainly they are stereotypes of manhood, the rapist, the bore, the gigolo, the commitment avoider. Although Hal is a sympathetic character, although something of a father figure, are they just fair game? Feel free to jump in, anybody.
I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to say they're fair game. I'm talking from a point of view of a writer, screenwriter. And we have to remember the context this was written in. This was written over 30 years ago. And when you are sort of going against the grain in terms of cinema, in terms of writing, you want those women are the central relationship. It's all about them. So everybody, you know, the men are periphery. Oh goodness, I can't believe there's somebody at my door.
That's okay.
Give me a moment, I'll be back. Could somebody else carry?
Yeah, I'll pick up. So I think it's really important that, you know, Callie Khouri has answered this question a lot, and she says, look, there's no behavior in this script that I haven't personally witnessed, you know, and let's like, what is this double standard when we think about the kinds of other depictions in other kinds of films? And a lot of the women would compare this to the Arnold Schwarzenegger film that was on that year. And but I also think it's important to know that in discussions of the production, they talk a lot about how the male actors actually magnified in their performances the negative aspects of these characters. So they were kind of playing with that too, right? That you've got these 4 or 5 different male characters, that each one of which portrays a sort of negative aspect of male behavior that's quite recognizable to people, right? And so, you know, I feel like that the critique that it stereotypes is a little, just a little shallow compared, and there are moments when all of the characters, including Daryl, have more kind of emotional resonance. They're there, we just see them less, perhaps only the truck driver.
Yeah. And I was listening to you, Marita, I completely agree. Yes, I do. And I think people only mention stereotypes if you are privileged. So if you've enjoyed privilege and all of a sudden that privilege is taken away from you, you start crying, you know, you start getting stereotype, and you have all sorts of different things because you're so used to seeing yourself as a whole being and not as a type. And so somebody sort of pointed out, well, actually, you have flaws. There are flaws in your character. There are flaws in the system. There's flaws in the law. The law is inept when it comes to working class women. It's inept when it comes to women, Black, white. It's inept. You know, the system, actually, regardless of where you are, working class male or upper class male, it privileges you. And now woman has written that experience, and all of a sudden you don't like it, so you just sort of scream stereotype. So that's what I think. Oh, it's privilege speaking.
I completely agree with you, Funky, there. I really do. Lucy, did you want to mention any of that? Should we ask the next one?
I think go on to the next one, because I thought that was answered brilliantly by
Okay. Definitely. Yeah, the next one's quite interesting. Again, Nigel, he said, I'm interested in the comparison between Queen and Slim, where the accidental shooting of a cop by a Black couple becomes an On the Run movie. It questions whether racial justice can be a possibility in the way that Thelma and Louise questioned sexual justice.
I have to say, I haven't seen the film. I've got to say, I apologize for having, but I've read bits of the script. And I think, you know, I was thinking of Thelma and Louise, funny enough, when I was reading elements of the script. And I thought, okay, I want to see how these people actually navigate, because it's Black male, Black female, not two Black females. What's the impact? What's going to happen to them? And I'm not so sure they can in America. So we've got to obviously contextualize this. In America, I'm not so sure there is such a thing called racial justice. I mean, we get that from time to time with civil rights, and, you know, people have been contesting the law and contesting the legal system for years. But, you know, the whole point of the Thelma and Louise, the whole point of Queen and Slim, and I don't know if they get away or they are caught in the end, is the fact they know, this is the whole point. The premise of it is, regardless of who you are, and I think Queen, she's a lawyer, if I remember rightly, there is no such thing as objective justice. And that's why these films are made, and that's why these films touch us on a very visceral level. If we had objective justice and, you know, everybody's treated fairly in front of the law, we wouldn't have these, and we wouldn't react so viscerally when we see these women or these characters portrayed in film. So I'm not so sure there can be within a white majority culture that, you know, is protecting its own, that there can be racial justice. And again, for men, a male majority culture that is looking after privilege and power, will there be justice for women? Can there be justice for women and women that are not part of that power structure?
Yeah, definitely. Anybody else want to comment on that one? No, I think, okay, no worries, we'll move on. I think we've got, Mariah's made some interesting comments in the chat box. She said, let me just double check I'm reading the right person. Yeah. First, thanks to organisers and excellent panellists. Rewatching the film after many years, I was struck by two things that jarred me. First, the only major screen time Black person in the film was the Rastafarian. Token for sure. On the other hand, he breathes freedom, liberation via ganja into the world of authoritarian. I honestly loved the bit when he put it in the thing. As Louise puts it, oh, he's a real Nazi. Or the role BIPOC people often play in white narratives. And then the second, Thelma wearing the trucker's hat felt off to me, felt more like a traditional masculine gesture of a trophy taking. As a woman, I would not want the sweat of a harasser on my head. Interested to hear your thoughts generally on those 2 points.
Well, I would say I do think that the Rasta guy is completely a token and out of context. And I'm guessing actually, well, I know it was a Ridley Scott thing, but I don't actually remember how it is in the script. But to me, I mean, there are a few moments like that, and to me, that is one of the moments that sort of dates the film, and they're not that many, right? On the other hand, the hat stuff, I mean, there are a lot of other moments in the film when the women start to give up certain things and acquire objects that signify masculinity. Louise hands over her rings to buy a cowboy hat or to barter for a cowboy hat. So to me, that gesture, it's true probably that the hat itself was sweaty and gross, but the gesture of taking over these symbols that really only belong to men, I think that theme has really worked its way through the film at that point.
I can't remember if the Rasta is in the script. I don't remember reading it. But I remember thinking it's a very British thing. I just thought, like something you see in a British context, you know, the cycles, the colours, it just looked so British. You know. Okay. I didn't know that happened in America. That's interesting. So
that's probably why it's Ridley Scott's.
Yeah, because I just thought, because in a sense, if you walk around, you know, cities, parts of London at that time, you'd have seen that imagery and what that represented, but I'm not so sure, you know, you see that now. So of course, you know, that's what I think. Regarding the gestures in terms of the hat, I think we can look back 30 years on and say, oh, I wouldn't want that. But we mustn't forget that this is cinema and it's not real life. And because it's cinematic, we're looking at a character journey, and we're looking at how that journey, how that character moves from the put upon wife. We mustn't forget where she was at the beginning of the film. The put upon wife who ends up being a liberated woman, and I put this in inverted commas, you know, but she's liberated to herself. She's no longer someone's wife or someone's daughter. She's now Thelma who wants to be Thelma, fully realized, or on the journey to full realization. So part of that is visually for us, because we're following this journey, we have to see what they give up. We see the change in clothing, and like Marita pointed out, this, you know, the exchange of trinkets. So where Louise sells a trinket, she even sells an engagement ring. So that tells you that relationship is over. If you thought there was a possibility she was going to get back, or she thought, she sold the engagement ring. She's closed the door to that. They are on a new life. So you look at that, you look at the outfits, you look at the way they dress. So wearing that hat is all part of that, shall I say, realization, self-actualization that the characters have to go through. And if we didn't have those signifiers, or we didn't have those gestures, and we didn't see those symbols, we're not so sure how much they've actually gone through, because we see the friendship, but we also, because it's film and it's a medium that requires and demands that we see action, and we see character action, that they have to make those gestures. It's just the nature of cinema. If it was a novel, she probably wouldn't do it, but because it's film, you know, these are things that we have to look out for.
Definitely. That's some really interesting points. I think there's a few different questions here about the ending and about whether it's seen as like a positive or a negative thing. And Chris compares it to Barbara Loden's film Wonder, which I don't personally know, but you guys might do. And whether we kind of see it as, you know, is it negative towards female strength and them being free? I think we've touched on it before on our kind of opinions of it, but do you think in the general it was positive or negative, I guess?
I think it's really important to understand how the ending is intended metaphorically, and Callie Khouri has really argued this quite strenuously and doesn't have a lot of patience with what she thinks are too literal interpretations of the ending. I mean, they can't go back. The film can't end with them going off to jail. It also can't end with them drinking margaritas by the sea, because Mexico is not outside the world that they are attempting to escape, right? So I mentioned it in my book, they did actually shoot two endings, and one ending really shows the car going, the alternative, which is on the DVD, shows the car really going down into the canyon, and the men sort of looking down at it, and it's much more bleak and much more literal, right? So the sort of sense of the car going off and then kind of whiting out, right, is really meant to sort of indicate they escape, right? They escape the law, they escape this world, right? And one of the things that I like about the way in which the ending is structured is that it almost immediately goes into a credit sequence in which you see images of the actors in character, right? And it's almost as if sort of saying they're still alive, right? And then the sort of car driving off. So the sort of, there is a kind of a literalization of they continue on in the end, right? And so that's why I think there's terrible sadness, I think, in that moment. Somebody mentioned this in the Q&A, but then I think it is also a fantasy of escape.
I remember, I completely agree with you, Marita. And I remember influenced my writing. When I remember writing The Window, and I thought, how do I do it? And I remember watching Thelma Louise about 4 or 5 times and looking at that ending, thinking, okay, how do I do this? These are 2 women married to the same man, and they want to leave him, and they're constrained. And I just used the bridge, just a bridge between the bridge between North London, North and South, that sort of inequality. And I thought, right, they say we can do anything we want. Let's just go. Let's go. And that comes from Thelma Louise for me, and that possibility. And I think, to me, it's very, very, it's a positive end, because anything is possible. It's the power, that power of possibility, that yes, even though they were caught between the, to use a stereotypical term, the devil in the deep blue sea, or the devil in the Grand Canyon, they still managed to escape. And they give us hope. And that's what's so wonderful about it. And it's not a sort of positive sort of Hollywood ending that, oh, social order has gone back. Yes, in a sense, social order has been restored because those 2 women are gone. But we've been marked in such a way that we, watching that, cannot be the same again. So that's what's interesting about it.
Yeah, I think sometimes as humans we get a bit obsessed with, and our curiosity gets the better of us. We get obsessed with being like, what happened next, and then what happened next, and that's why, we end up with these sequels that we then regret asking for. So yeah, I think actually the whole feel of the film is much nicer with actually, well, what did it mean to you, and you take away what you need from it. Sorry, Lucy, were you going to say something as well?
I'm just going to say it's quite interesting how I think from some of the men I've spoken to about the film, I think they often interpret the ending in a different way. So for women, it often is what we've been talking about, this sense of hope, and then I think sometimes men see it in a different way. So this sort of gendered viewing of the film in some way, and those differences in the audiences.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well. And I think probably says a lot about the societal differences in what we kind of the way our brains work. Yeah, Rachel's asked a really interesting question. She said, interesting to read about the difficulties getting the film made, in brackets, studio reluctant to fund a film about 2 chicks in a car, and the fears about the appeal and audience reach. How do you think the film would go down if being released now, and who would it be targeted at in its marketing?
I think that film would be made now very easily, with Netflix. We have and so Netflix will put it on. It will be, I don't know, series about, 10-hour series about these 2 women on the run. And it will be like Narcos, I think, because, it has the same aesthetics or similar aesthetics. So yes, I think, and in terms of box office, it won't be a case of the money, it'd just be a case of streaming, how many people they could reach. So yes, I think that. And we've got, because of Thelma Louise and other films that preceded Thelma Louise that put women in the frame, in the center of the frame, that we have a lot of female-led dramas.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there anything that's
marketed
comparable?
to us? Yeah, it's marketed to us in that way. Netflix will say things like, "Oh, female lead." It's not a genre, but we put it there because we know you like it, or we think you would like it. So yeah, I think it's
an interesting question whether or not that promise, because when the film came out, everybody's like, this changes everything, and now we're going to have all these great films that really feature women, and of course it didn't happen, and there was a whole discussion about why. But actually it does seem like the world of streaming, right, has effectively pushed forward that promise in ways that just couldn't happen within the structure of, I mean, I'm just thinking about somebody like Shonda Rhimes and her power and the structure in the industry before Netflix and now Amazon and other things challenged that. Yeah. I've just been watching a series called Somos, which is a Mexican series, though the James Shamus, who's an American, is the showrunner, and that is specifically about violence in Mexico, but it heavily features women characters and women characters kind of struggling with what's going on, right? And it's apparently a massive Netflix hit in Mexico right now. So doors got opened through these kinds of economic shifts that also eliminated many of these things like pilots, right? That were incredible barriers to admission to the system. The other thing I want to say is that it's true that this film got made because of Ridley Scott. I mean, he was the one, came in as a producer, and then he was interviewing directors and he decided he wanted to direct it himself. So he had the power to make it happen, for which he should get credit, of course.
And I was just saying, on the film front, I guess we've got other good examples, haven't we? Like Promising Young Woman. So that was written by
right.
And that was obviously really influenced by Thelma Louise. I won't spoil it for anyone, but urge you to read that. And then things like Nomadland. And so I think there is a shift, although what seems to happen is there's a lot of noise around those particular films, which makes it seem like there's a lot more of them than there are, but that's still sadly not the case. But as everyone else has mentioned, there's loads of really fantastic things happening through streaming, like I May Destroy You with Michaela Cole. There's also something called Feel Good with what's it called, I've had a blank now, but that's another really good one on Netflix. But there's a lot there, and then I guess the audience can find it, and we actually know that actually female led films actually make more profit in the box office. So the fact that we've been denied these female led stories for so long is ridiculous, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I May Destroy You is a wonderful thing to compare it to, especially around the ideas of like consent as well, and that that's very prominent in Thelma and Louise, and really prominent in I May Destroy You, and it's a really interesting, complicated subject. So it's really great to see how kind of films are handling it, and the role of a intimacy coordinator being introduced, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that would have been a thing during Thelma and Louise.
No, I don't think so.
No, so it was beautiful to see Michaela Cole's speech on that, about how even in the filming process, it's very delicate subject, and you're dealing with vulnerable people, actors or not. So I think it's nice to see where we've come from that place, for sure. Let's have a look at the question, see if there's anything else. Okay, this is interesting. Mariah said, at the time, the kiss proposed by Susan Sarandon at the end of the shooting was quite controversial, particularly among many heterosexual folks and some of the lesbian community. How do you think it read then and reads now?
That's such an interesting question, because I just think of where I'm transporting myself back in time and thinking, it's so funny, because I was part of women that were making films in the Women's Centre. It registered, but it wasn't a big thing. It was just, shall I call it an externalization of friendship to me? It didn't, that's all it was. It wasn't anything else. And then, when I read about the controversy about the kiss, I thought, did we see the same film? So I remember that was my question, because I thought, no, this is about female friendship. I kiss my friends all the time, So I just thought, I don't understand this. So, and I don't know if that would, now maybe it will resonate differently, because of course we have, if you think of the role of intimacy coaching, you think about bodies, and you think about how we guard ourselves and how we're now aware of boundaries. Possibly it'd be different. I don't know.
I feel sort of like it was, because the film is so explicitly about heterosexual women's friendships, right? But I feel like it also did sort of open up a broader discussion about female sexuality. And to me, that was just a way of allowing other fantasies to come off the film in a way that I thought was kind of fruitful, right? So I realized that you put in the chat that in the Q&A that it was controversial, but I think it was more like, can we claim this film too, right? You know, does it belong to us? Does it belong to heterosexual women? Does it belong to lesbians? And I think it was perhaps a gesture towards opening that up. I'm not so sure they thought about it that much, though, as you're saying. It was just, yeah, let's do that. They weren't thinking, how will that register with lesbian viewers? You know.
Lucy, did you want to mention anything about that?
Oh no, I think that's sort of been covered, because at the time I didn't, a bit like Funke was saying, I found that was maybe, you know, just a sense of the closeness of female friendship, and I guess the shock is that maybe it hadn't been seen on screens, but it was actually a reality that, you know, with your close friends, that's, you know, that's something that you might do, you know.
Yeah, and definitely I think it must represent the difference between maybe a male friendship and a female friendship, and how that emotional side of it is not so much. I mean, when I watched it, I just blank face, didn't faze me. I was just like, of course they are. It's, you're feeling emotional and you love your friends, and you know, that I've kissed my friends lots of times, sometimes after a couple of margaritas, but but you know, it's not a problem, and for sure. Great. Let's have a look at what else people are asking. I mean, I had quite a question about I think Shelley's had to go, unfortunately, but Funke, you've taught Thelma and Louise, is that correct?
Yeah, I've taught it screenwriting, yeah.
Yeah, and what do you think the young person's take on it is, and why it's kind of aged well, or do you think it's aged well, and do you think why do you still use it to teach?
Okay, I think it's aged well because of I'm just obsessed with characters, and I love the way those characters are written. I like the detail in the characters, and I like their journey. And obviously I like the story, but it's aged well because of the craft, like Marita mentioned this earlier on, and we both mentioned it earlier on, is that craft between the writing and the directing. And you see it, and that's why it still holds up. You know, this is a film that will probably hold up another 30 years. And most importantly, it's that, you know, even though we have female-centered films, and we're sort of sometimes we're desensitized to where these films have come from, or the tropes that have sort of led to them. I teach with Thelma Louise because these are characters that I know that, you know, I don't necessarily see on the screen at the moment. And plus of that potential of sexual violence, and how these women are trapped, really understanding what it is to be trapped by class. To be trapped by gender, and yet you're supposed to be privileged. And I think it's that disconnect that I find fascinating, and the way those characters are portrayed, the detail that Callie Khouri brings to the character realizations is what I find fascinating. And my young students love it, because you see their eyes pop out of their heads, sort of, oh, I haven't seen this. I didn't know this. And I remember once I was teaching, we've got this wonderful sort of design studio in the basement floor, and the noise, you know, people could, other students from other subjects could hear the music, and they all came out and they were all watching the film. You know, we just had a group of 100 students on the balcony sat watching this film. And then, you know, this is where Louise, this is first act, we're getting into the first act, so I call it, you know, trap that's been set, and then when the trap is shut and she shoots him, and it's the silence, it's oh my goodness. And it points out one thing: we're human, yeah? Human beings are still emotional, still visceral, we still respond to these things. And yes, we've moved, yes, time has moved on, but has human behavior moved on? I'm not so sure it has. And that's why I share it. One, because it's beautifully crafted, and two, it resonates with women and men today. So that's why and it's just so well written. It's one of my top 10 films of all time. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Holly.
Just realised, thank you. After a year, still not used to it. That's really lovely. Thank you, Funke. We're almost at the end there, so I think I'm just going to ask for some final thoughts from our lovely panelists. I think we'd just like, if you could leave the audience with some words of inspiration, what would they be? Maybe around Thelma and Louise, or generally around the wider subjects. Anything would be great. Marita, do you want to go first?
Oh, I think what Funke just said was so perfect.
So we've swapped the roles.
I think that the promise of Thelma and Louise is still a work in progress, and we are seeing it realized in some ways 30 years later, but obviously there's the kinds of social issues that it's pointing to are still very much with us today. So in that sense, its relevance is both cautionary, but also hopeful.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I hope we can keep showing it to younger people and discussing it.
Definitely. Funke, any final words?
I have no thoughts. I think,
You've said it all.
So yes, we're intertwined. So we're speaking for each other and with each other. I think the thing about it is just, I think we mustn't, as women of color, or women, or white women, or just women in general, we can't get complacent. Never ever get complacent. And that film always reminds you that, look, you may change the law, but the law may be in effect of the people actually enacting the law, or the people actually putting the law in practice may be ineffective. So don't ever get complacent. So that's what means. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's work to be done. Lucy, any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, Marita and Funke have been fantastic, so thank you so much. And in the words of, Thelma, it's let's keep going, because we've got work to do. And I think the positivity and the energy, and the fact that that film does show friendship or sisterhood, and we've got sort of male allies, and thank you to those who have joined. So it is about, the fight's still there to be had. And if you're a filmmaker, a screenwriter, make those stories that we still haven't seen, that still aren't seen on the screens, because there's a real sort of thirst and hunger for them, and and that's why it's really inspiring to watch this film, and hopefully keep on inspiring the next generation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. That's everything. Thank you so much for joining us, from audience to panelists. I really appreciate it. It's been really in-depth and interesting discussion, and I feel like I could sit here all day and carry on talking about it quite happily. Just a reminder to please tweet out if you've enjoyed it, and I think Neil's put the tweets, the handles in there quite a few times, and we have got some more sessions going on today and tomorrow. So tomorrow we've got 2 lovely masterclass, and also today at 4 o'clock we've got another panel discussion with particularly Madeline Donono, who is the president of the Geena Davis Institute on Gender and Media. So that's going to be really, really interesting. So please do join us for that if you're available. The link is in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming, and have a lovely Monday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.